As the Chancellor prepares himself for his battery of spending cuts in tomorrow's emergency budget, workers employed by the government will be in the front line. Nationwide, 1 in 5 workers are employed in the public sector. On average, they earn 30% more, work 23% less and retire 9 years earlier than those in the private sector. Well, the government has already said that there will be a pay freeze on public sector workers earning more than £18,000 a year, and that's just the very beginning. Our next guest says that Britain's economy could face a lost decade if it takes a wrong turn now. Her worst-case scenario predicts a vicious circle of job losses in all sectors. Well, I hope she's also going to tell me how the country can avoid that particular nightmare. Vanessa Rossi, Senior Research Fellow at Chatham House, joins me now. Good morning.
Hi, good morning.
Thanks very much for coming to talk to us about this today. It seemed like before the election there were an awful lot of economists calling for these deep cuts, saying that's what Britain needed. Now that George Osborne's about to implement them, there's a lot more voices of dissent that I'm hearing. Are you really concerned about a double-dip recession?
Well, you know, it's easier to criticise than do these things. And to be realistic in our report, we're actually highlighting as the most likely scenario that the UK actually pulls it off. But we can understand the doubts. We're in the midst at the moment of not only difficulties with the UK economy, there's a euro crisis, we're not sure how strong the US recovery is and so forth. Certainly today the news from China has somewhat overshadowed things and stolen Osborne's thunder, but it's actually quite helpful for the global background. And so what we're trying to highlight here is that we're going to face a two-way pull between the positive side of global growth and what can the UK do to leverage that, to gain the most it can from that growth, and the other side of the fiscal austerity. And balancing these two phenomena are going to be the critical factor in determining whether we grow or not. And at the end of the day, what will decide whether this government, Osborne, is successful is whether the economy grows.
Indeed.
That's what people will remember afterwards, and so it's something of a gamble that this happens. On the positive side, it has been done before, and we did manage to grow strongly in the 1990s, for example, perhaps a little easier at that time than now, but I think we should be alive to the fact that it can work. So I understand all the question marks over this, and I think the question marks, we have to understand both sides. It's both the worry about growth, but also on a longer-term basis, if you don't get to grips with this fiscal deficit problem, it will come back to haunt you. So you may only be postponing the problems a year or two. So unfortunately, I think Osborne has a difficult task. He has to take tough decisions now, but he has to hope that this global growth will pull us through it.
Now, there was this idea that sort of, 4 to 1, that there would be there'd be 4 times as many spending cuts as there were tax rises. We are going to see some painful tax rises as well, aren't we? Well,
I think the immediate announcements are going to be these, because it's rather strange how we keep highlighting all of these massive changes that will happen over the next 5 years. But actually, the decisions tomorrow are likely to be quite narrow about the immediate measures. And my own feeling is that we're going to get some of the tax rises early on, and that the spending side is going to be freezing it up and waiting to look for the longer-term review before other decisions are made. And that's quite sensible, because it means you're pulling in some money and helping to curb the deficit early on, and you hope that with a fair wind behind the economy, maybe in a few years' time you needn't be quite so Scrooge-like about your budgets, which would be very convenient, of course.
Yes. I mean, it does. I mean, the argument that says it's really hard to promote growth when the public sector is contracting seems to be quite an attractive one, really. It is going to be very hard for the private sector, who at the moment isn't growing very much at all, to decide that they're going to invest, they're going to bring in new employees, when in fact the public sector is shrinking.
Well, but you know, it's very strange with economists. We have two sides of these arguments, because the other side people would put is that if the government continues spending so much, they will actually crowd out the private sector. So we have a two-way pull on this one as well. I think the difficulties are that we really are poised now on this knife edge, and getting it right isn't just about pandering to not having cuts. It's about getting the right sequence of cuts now and in the next few years to ensure that we have choices in the future. To put it bluntly, you see, if Osborne does not get control of the fiscal problems now and in the next couple of years, in 2 or 3 years' time, if the world again has turbulence, we will have no room for manoeuvre whatsoever. And that's extremely dangerous if you look at what happens with economies that do face that problem. So when I'm talking about the lost decade, actually part of the lost decade risk is that Osborne doesn't do enough now to put us in that more secure position in a few years' time. So it's a very difficult sine qua non situation, but I think we have to look at increasing some taxes now to have that security for the future.
Well, let's hope that he gets that balancing act right for all of our sakes.
And offer us some confidence in that longer-term future too.
Absolutely. Vanessa Rossi, thank you very much indeed.